Welcome back, my friends. So good to be back and speaking to you about the Gene Keys and other things in the world of astromancy, which is exciting. I'm super excited because over the past couple months, I've kind of shifted around some things in my business, and that's also resulted in a cool new format that I want to bring to the podcast, where we're going to have different sections for different things. And this is the first episode that we get to try that out, which is really exciting. There's just a lot of things I want to talk about, and I want to keep them organized and I want to keep them straight. And so, yeah, well, you'll see the sections as the episodes go along. Today, what you'll always have is like a main teachable moment that'll be like the bulk of the episode. So what we're going to get into today is the Gene Keys book on why it feels so intimidating. That's like the main teachable moment, the main sort of value and conversation that I want to bring. But then there's things that I am excited about that we're going to get into in a little section that I like to call MG Mischief. We're going to get into what this manifesting generator is excited about these days. We're going to have FAQ sections just so that people can bring questions. We can answer them on the podcast and just bring a longer form conversation to a lot of these questions because they require a longer form answer a lot of the times. And we'll have other sections here and there. Those are just the sections that we're going to bring in today, the little segments, just the little bits and pieces of the structure of episode. And yeah, in future episodes, we'll see different sections start to come about, different segments. So yeah, I'm excited. Enjoy my raspy, getting over cold voice. And let's get into the main teachable moment of today's episode, which is the Gene Keys book. So I wanted to bring this topic to the podcast because I think it requires a long conversation. To catch you up briefly, about a month ago, I made a video. I made a TikTok video and it was just following a trend. And that video has now over 500,000 views on TikTok, which is so exciting. I'll link it below if you want to see it. And there's a couple reasons why that's exciting. Number one, I think it's cool that 500 plus thousand people saw the Gene Keys, for example. Like a lot of people in that section were like, oh, I've heard of human design, I've heard of astrology, but I've never heard of the Gene Keys. That's really cool. I definitely aim to bring Gene Keys to a wider audience. So that feels like something on that goal or like a milestone on that goal, which is cool. Number two, something that was really exciting about that is people were really interested for the most part. Obviously, you had people coming in here and being like, we need to stop taking astrology seriously. Like that was a comment on there, whatever, trolling, but like 99% of the comments in the video were kind and also inquisitive. So people were really curious about these systems. The video was about astrology, human design, and Gene Keys and just how they can be so transformative. And people were so curious about Gene Keys naturally because there's not a lot of information out there. And a couple of the comments that were brought up were around the Gene Keys book. So the really cool part about that video before we get into the Gene Keys book is that there are so many questions in there and comments and like topics of discussion, which is just like a gold mine for a generator type like myself who wants to respond. It can be really difficult to create what feels like in a void, when you're a generator, when you are wanting something to respond to, especially if you're a line five like me, or you have a lot of line fives like me. I want to provide answers. That's the goal. Like, I'm like, how can I answer your question? But that question of how can I answer your question includes the fact that there's a question to answer, that someone's asking me a question. So that's another just like amazing gift from that video going viral, is like so many questions and like points of conversation and topics and things to talk about, which is just, like I said, it's just a gold mine. It's such a gift for a generator type. So getting into one of the first things, I just kind of browsed at like a menu and I was like, what do I want to respond to? Which is how I recommend you, respond to things as a generator, is like, here's a menu of options. What lights you up the most? And what was most exciting to me, or what was jumping out at me, was this comment that was like, I started to read the Gene Keys book, but it was just too intimidating. And that's what we're going to get into today. Okay, so we're going to start with kind of like an annoyingly vague sentence, and then we're going to get into exactly what that means. So the main reason why the Gene Keys book, and when people say the Gene Keys book, they're typically talking about Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose. It's the original book that was published in 2009, and it has a blue cover, so I like to call it the blue book. Why people name that book or call it intimidating or convoluted or difficult to penetrate is because it's not a book. Okay, what the hell does that mean? So the Gene Keys book, I'm going to call it the blue book. Let's talk about the content first of what's in the blue book. So the blue book, and you can find it linked below. Again, it's called Gene Keys Embracing Your Higher Purpose. I will title that as the blue book. What is inside that book is the main bulk of that content is the sort of pure direct transmission of the 64 gene keys. So like 99% of the book is the 64 gene keys: shadow, gift, and city. So each gene key has its own chapter, and we're going to talk about e-readers at the end of this episode. But what's nice is if you read it on an e-reader like I do, you can just click on the chapter section and then you can just go to the gene key that you want to go to. And so each individual gene key has its own chapter, and then it's split up in 3 different sections. We have the shadow, the gift, and the city section. So this is the book that you want to go to if you want to engage directly with the frequencies of the spectrum of consciousness, which is just the 64 gene keys: shadows, gifts, and cities. There's an introduction at the beginning, and that introduction is really interesting to read. And then there's a really fantastic section at the end that is called the Glossary of Empowerment, and it includes a glossary of definitions of a lot of just the most commonly used Gene Keys terms, or like the Gene Keys terms, basically. So you'll find definitions there for the word shadow, the word gift, the word city, as well as things like the Corpus Christi and the astral body and things like that. Removing those two aside, not talking about the introduction and not talking about the glossary of empowerment at the end, we have the bulk of that book, which is the 64 gene keys written in full, the original transmission that was received by Richard Rudd, who was the messenger of this information. He was the recipient of the mutated gene keys transmission. I call it mutated because it's based in the I Ching 64 hexagrams, and then it has its roots in human design, which has its roots in astrology and the Kabbalah and the I Ching and astrology and all that kind of stuff. If you want to know more about how those come together, I have a whole masterclass on it called The Systems. And if you're ever curious about how Richard received this information, then I have a whole masterclass called The Messengers, which is about Richard and Ra receiving that in their respective systems, gene keys and human design respectively. But yeah, the 64 gene keys is not entirely original. It's a mutation of the 64 hexagrams, and there had to be like an original receiving of that information, which is what is, I think, attempted to be contained in the blue book. Because let's think about how this information came to be. Like, we have this mystic and poet in the body of Richard Rudd, right? Richard Rudd is, I think he's about to hit 60. He's a British man. He was a mystic. He's a poet. So he writes in poetic language, and he studied the I Ching and studied human design. And it all kind of came together in this experience of receiving the gene keys and then writing it. So you have that, which is the person. And then you have the actual original transmission. Those are 2 very different things, and I think we need to talk about them and like what they are. So the transmission is, in this case, the gene keys synthesis. So that includes the 64 gene keys, that includes the golden path, that includes the dream arc and the star pearl and all the sets of teachings that come from the gene keys synthesis. It's not just the 64 gene keys, there's a bunch more teachings that come from that. And then there's the messenger, which is one guy. His name is Richard Rudd, and he was born in England. He's almost 60, and he was a mystic and a poet. And those things are very different. The job of the messenger is to receive the transmission and then do their best to put it out in something like this, the Gene Keys Blue Book, Embracing Your Higher Purpose. But it's important to not confuse this book with the actual transmission, which is available to be tapped into at any time. So let's talk about what a transmission is a little bit more, and then we'll get into why this book is so intimidating, because I think it's a really close approximation of the transmission. But the transmission, there are lots of transmissions, right? The human design system is a transmission. The astrology system is a transmission. Reiki is a transmission. And the gene key synthesis is a transmission. A transmission is, this is the part that's been like so hard to describe, but the way it's described in the gene keys, we'll start from there, is it's called a set of living teachings, or a living wisdom, really is what it's called, a living wisdom. And a living wisdom feels difficult to describe when you've had the experience of engaging with it, because it's just so obvious what that means. But when you haven't had that experience, it's very weird to be like, well, what's a dead wisdom, you know? And we'll parse that out. But before we even get there, what we have to understand is that a transmission, and in this case, let's talk about the Gene Keys transmission. The Gene Keys transmission is, you could almost describe it as like a set of codes that is living in the realm of frequency. That's different than, say, like the temperature in the air, which is another kind of frequency. It's like the speed at which molecules are moving, but it's very easy to measure that with a tool like a thermometer. Everything is frequency, as we know. Temperature is frequency, but then there's many different types of frequencies, and then there's different realms of frequencies that we can tap into these things with. I know I might be like losing you already, but just stay with me. So to understand the realm of frequencies that the Gene Keys synthesis lives in, we're going to do a little bit of background on the way that the Gene Keys itself actually looks at frequency and the realm of frequencies. This is a teaching within the Gene Keys synthesis that is sort of a little bit in the weeds at first and can be definitely difficult to grasp, but I think it can actually be really easy to understand. So the teaching is called the teaching of the Corpus Christi, and you can actually find that written in very intense detail in the chapter for Gene Key 22. If you've ever read the chapter for Gene Key 22 or its sister chapter, Gene Key 55, you know that they're extremely long, and there's a lot of stuff in there because a lot of teachings came from both of those Gene Keys. In Gene Key 22 alone, we get the entire teaching of the Venus sequence, so it's a very intense transmission. And so within that, we get the teaching of the Corpus Christi, or the seven sacred bodies. And that's essentially the Gene Keys perspective on the human aura and the different auras that we have. And I'll just say them pretty simply. They really are pretty simple. We essentially, you can think of this like a hexagram if you're familiar with hexagrams. There's 3 lower levels, and then there's 3 higher levels that are an octave higher of the 3 lower levels. And then there's the 7th level. So in the lower 3 levels, these are the levels that we're really familiar with as humans. We have the physical plane, so like my physical 3D body. Then we have the emotional plane, which is called the astral plane or the astral body. And then we have the mental plane. So we have physical, emotional, and mental. Those are the realms of frequency that all of us are extremely familiar with. So what that shows us right away is that we have, if we're imagining like the human being and like the anatomy of our aura, which by the way, I would say that human design is like the anatomy of your aura, essentially. Like it's an anatomy textbook of your aura, basically. But the Gene Keys has its own perspective too. And it has at the lowest 3 levels, physical, emotional, and then mental. So what those teach us really quickly is that those are 3 separate aura levels, and they actually are in that order. And so what then that means is that we have 3 different parts of our energetic anatomy that are meant to interface with those 3 different realms. So what do I mean by that? My body isn't the same thing as my emotional body, which is what's feeling my emotions. And that's not the same thing as my mental body, which is what's thinking my thoughts, or in this case, the Gene Keys perspective, attracting the thoughts. So there's 3 different parts of my energetic anatomy, and they each have a different function. And they obviously interface, like my thoughts definitely impact my emotions, which definitely impact my physical being. They obviously interface, but they are different things in the way that, let's say this, my eye measures different information than my nose, which measures different information than my tongue. They're not the same thing. And so we have different parts of our aura in the Gene Key system that measure different things. What's interesting about this, again, if we compare it to human design, what is the physical body, but let's say the splenic center, which is like the body awareness center, which is a processing center. And then what is the emotional body, but the solar plexus or the emotional center, which is an emotional processing center. And then what is the mental body other than like the ajna, which is the mental processing center. So we have a lot of crossover between these systems, but from the Gene Keys perspective, we have the physical body, we have the astral body, and then we have the mental body. What that then implies is that there are three realms of frequency that we are in. They're called planes in the Gene Keys teachings. So we have the physical plane, then we have the astral plane, which is the emotional plane, and then we have the mental plane. So there's actually different dimensions, you could say, that these three different bodies are interfacing with. So my body can get information from the physical plane, my emotional body, my astral body can get information from the emotional plane, and then my mental body can get information from the mental plane. Okay, we're going to get to the transmission. We're almost there. Those are the lower three bodies of the Corpus Christi, or the seven sacred bodies. Then we have the higher three. So the physical body has a higher body, which is called the causal body. Then the astral body has a higher version of that, which is called the Buddhic body. And then we have the mental body, which has a higher version of that, which is called the Atmic body. And then that also implies that they are higher realms that we can connect to. So the easiest way to think about these three higher bodies is like these are the enlightened versions of the lower three bodies. So what would be the enlightened or higher version of the physical body? It's our soul. So the causal body is described as a soul in the Gene Keys teachings. Then we have the enlightened version of our emotional body or astral body, being the Buddhic body. This is like heart fully open, like states of bliss. I could imagine that maybe like Tantra, like higher sexual energies might live here. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but that's just like a thought I'm having. And then the highest, or the sort of enlightened thought body, which is the Atmic body, is the most interesting place when it comes to thinking about transmissions, because that's the realm of transmission. So again, each body assumes there's a plane to interact with. The Atmic plane is where all transmissions lie, because this is the realm of enlightened thoughts. Thoughts are just frequencies, and the Gene Keys perspective says that your mind is just an antenna that attracts these frequencies in, depending on the frequency of your own mind. So the higher frequency my mind, the higher frequency the thoughts I will attract, and the higher frequency of the thoughts that I will then have. And at the highest frequency of the Atmic body, or the Atmic plane, we have literally what's there. What is said is this is the realm of the cities. So all city frequencies, all enlightened frequencies live in the Atmic plane. And what also lives there is essentially all transmissions, or maybe we could say all higher transmissions, because I'm not the police on transmissions, but the Gene Keys transmission certainly lives there. And so that's what we are engaging with when we're engaging with a transmission. We're engaging with enlightened thoughts. We're engaging with a plane of frequency that is extremely high, and it first starts in the mental realm, and it starts from an enlightened version of like our mental body, which in the Gene Keys it's called the Atmic body. And so that's what's in this book. This book is the best attempt to capture what's in that realm, because what's in that realm is languageless, right? What's in that realm is not English, and it's certainly not, at least in my guess, I don't think it's so perfectly organized of like, this is the 64, this, that, the other. Like, we can parse it out, but it's a field of frequency that has a shit ton of wisdom and a lot of information, and anyone can tap into it. Anyone, not just Richard Rudd. Richard Rudd, like I said, I like to just call him the messenger. Like I don't know if we are meant to say that he is the most tapped in. Like, I don't think it's about that, whether he's more or less or whatever. I mean, clearly he is extremely tapped into that frequency. But yeah, he's the one that in this incarnation, I don't know how he would describe it, so I'm not quoting him. This is just the way I would think about it. He's the one decoding this information for us, or receiving this transmission, receiving this frequency, and then putting it into a book. So it's important to not confuse the transmission, which is a set of frequencies that make up a living wisdom that are in this plane that anyone can tap into, with a book that's written in English that has pages. At the same time, this is the closest approximation, in my perspective, of what is in that field. And so that's what I mean when I say it's not a book. It reads like a transmission. And my experience is that when you're reading it, you tap into the transmission. So that's why you're not meant to read this book like a textbook or front to back. It's even said that it even says that at the intro of the book is like, this isn't a regular book. You don't need to read it from Gene Key 1 to Gene Key 64, etc. Like it's also meant to be kind of an oracle. That's how the I Ching was originally used anyway. Just flip to a random page and see where it lands, and that's your gene key for the day or the answer to a question you were asking, like a tarot card or something like that. But what's in here is Richard's attempt, essentially, to capture and describe and almost like infuse the transmission in something that is able to be read. And it's very challenging to read, especially if you don't understand that that's what you're engaging with. So let's get into why the book is intimidating. So we have this nice distinction of what the transmission is. We had to just go into the Corpus Christi, I guess. That wasn't my plan for this episode, but it is important. And I do teach that in the Master Key if you're curious about that. That's my Gene Keys reader training program. And then we know that Richard is just a man. Richard is a man. He's a 3D human. And like I said, he's born in England, so he's going to write in English. And he also is a poet, so it's going to come out in this poetic language. Okay, so you got that. He's just one guy. You can also tap into the transmission too. That is also my experience, like as a reader, a teacher, when I'm doing profile sessions, when I'm teaching my students, I look up and to the right or to the left or somewhere. And that's like my way of tapping into the transmission in order to access it and receive the information that needs to come through. So you can also tap into this transmission. But my point is, with this really long intro, is this book is an energetic experience, basically. This book is it's a way, it's almost like I'm holding up the book right now if you're not watching this on YouTube. Like when I am reading the book, it feels like it's beaming frequency at me, essentially. Me reading it and engaging with it is actually, speaking of books we're going to talk about later, in MG Mischief is I've been in his Dark Materials world because the Rose Field just came out. We'll talk about that later. But in that realm, they talk about consciousness as dust and you can see it. And so you can see it between certain things and the consciousness sort of moves between objects. I'm not going to give all that stuff away. Read the books. They're fantastic. But I feel that there is consciousness being transmitted, speaking of transmissions, but from the book to me and back. And so there's an energetic experience that's being had there. It's not a reading experience necessarily. Like I'm not learning like I would in a book, in a textbook. I mean, I'm not reading a novel. I'm getting caught into a story, and those things might be part of it. Like I said, Richard is a poet. There are stories that are being told there. There's beautiful quotes, incredibly beautiful language, etc. But more of what's happening is I'm in, it's almost like being in a meditation, really, which is kind of interesting, or like a really active meditation, and reading it is impacting me. And it's not called the Gene Keys for nothing. It is literally changing your DNA, essentially. It's touching certain things inside you, inside your DNA, activating them, causing them to act differently, behave differently, express differently, which then causes you to think differently, feel differently, behave differently, etc. It is not a normal experience of reading a book. And so I think, to get more practical, why it's intimidating is because, number one, it can be a really difficult piece of text to penetrate. If you're wanting to read it and wanting it to be something that's very practically explained to you, like that's why I have a job, by the way, is because I can practically explain this stuff in a course setting like the Master Key or the master classes that I shared earlier, or in my reading sessions. Like I can practically break this down. If you're wanting that, that's not what this book is. But don't sleep on it. This is literally the most direct, besides you directly engaging with the Gene Keys transmission in the realm of frequency, this is the most direct way that you can do that, is by reading this book, and as it's called in the Gene Keys, imbibing it, taking it in, allowing the beams of frequency to like come in your body and change your life. If you're coming into the book with, okay, I'm going to learn about the Gene Keys, that's really hard, because the Gene Keys, quote unquote, is a huge set of teachings. Like we talked about, like the Gene Keys synthesis is a huge set of teachings. So here's my more practical breakdown and thoughts on this book. Number one, to get really clear again on the content, this is the book that is specifically written on the 64 Gene Keys. There are separate books on the activation sequence, on the Venus sequence, and on the Pearl sequence. The courses that you can buy online, I'll link them below, they include those books and more. So if you wanted to learn those sequences directly from the source, just buy the course because it also includes the book. I also teach all that stuff in the Master Key, of course, and the Master Key includes the courses themselves. But yeah, the sequences are totally different books. The Art of Contemplation, which is the method by which you engage with the gene keys, that's a totally different book. There's, I believe, a book on the Corpus Christi that I talked about and other things like that. But specifically, this book, the Gene Keys book, we're just looking at the 64 gene keys, pretty much. We're not talking about sequences. We are not talking about the star pearl. We're not talking about the art of contemplation. We're not talking about any of that. It's the 64 universal codes that can essentially explain everything being beamed into your body at a really high frequency. So that's the main content. So if you are wanting to, if you're like looking at your gene keys chart, you went to get your free profile, I'll link it below, and you're looking at your life's work and it says that it's gene key 54 in my case, and you're like, I want to read what the gene key 54 transmission is, that's when you would go to this book. So then that leads me to the second thing I want to say about this to be able to engage with it. I really would always recommend any person to start with your own gene keys. So I wouldn't recommend this is another reason why it's intimidating. It's a huge book, by the way. So another kind of nice reason why e-readers are nice that we'll talk about later is I don't really get overwhelmed by the size of it because it's all the same size because it's all on my Kindle. But of course it would be so intimidating if you were like, I got to read this book from start to finish and read all of it and go from A to Z. That is crazy. That's not at all how you're meant to engage with the book. Here's what I would say. Definitely read the intro. Read the intro. It's a really interesting experience. The first time I read it, I felt like I was falling into a wormhole. It was a crazy experience. So definitely read the intro and then go look at your profile. Again, you can get it. I'll link it below to see what are your gene keys, what's your life's work, what's your purpose, what's your vocation, maybe start from there, and then go to those chapters and start with that. And maybe just start with the shadow and the gift. Maybe skip the city. The cities are enlightenment frequencies. They're challenging to penetrate in general, let alone at a not enlightened level. Because when you're reading a book, you're probably not in a state of complete surrender and ego death and just complete and total enlightenment, right? We're more in the human realm of 3D. So it can be really difficult to engage with the cities. So again, do not feel like you have to read this book from start to finish. Pull up your chart and then find the gene keys that you're most interested in, and then go and read those shadows and those gifts in the gene keys book. That would be my next piece of advice. And then after that, again, just stick to your gene keys. So then if you want to keep reading more, you're super excited about it, read the rest of your chart. Then you can even add in human design and read all the gene keys of the gates that are in your human design. So it's the same number. So if you have gate 1, for example, I have gate 1 in my human design, but it's not in my gene keys chart, it's gene key 1. So read gene key 1. Thank God the numbers are all the same. Go from there. And then after that, let your intuition take you. I always recommend reading pairing partners. So each gene key has its own opposite. Let me know. I can do a whole episode on that if that's exciting to you. But understanding the opposite of the gene key will help you to understand the gene key that you're interfacing with. Your activation sequence is a set of opposites. So your life's work and evolution are pairing partners because it's the sun and earth. They're opposites on the zodiac wheel. And then you have the unconscious sun and earth on the other side for radiance and purpose. So same thing there. But even for aspects of your chart, again, let's say I have gene key 1 in my human design. I don't have gene key 2. I don't have gate 2. Reading gate 2, reading gene key 2 will help me to understand gene key 1 more. So absolutely recommend reading pairing partners. And then if you want to read the rest of them, go for it. It's all good. Do what you want to do. Follow your intuition. But just know that when you're reading this book, you're engaging in an energetic experience. It's a spiritual experience. It's in the realm of frequency. Your mind might go to other places. It's not like reading a normal textbook. Like I keep saying, I don't know another way to describe it. So my apologies. I'll keep seeing what else comes through this episode today. But yeah, it's a really potent experience essentially. And that's another thing too. My whole practical tips have really been about setting expectations for engaging with this. The other expectation would be the mindset you're in when you want to read the book. I know that when I'm going to pick up a chapter, it's because I'm okay, I'm going to get into a nice deep contemplation of this gene key. So recently, what gene key came up for? I think it was 43. Like I read 57 a few weeks ago because the sun was in gate 57 and it was my design day because my unconscious sun is in gate 57 or gene key 57. And it's like, it was my design day, so I treat it like a second birthday, basically. I went to a nice part of beautiful campus and I got a snack before, and actually a whole meal. It was like a nice salad and a drink. And it was a beautiful day, and I found a nice spot at the park to sit in, and then I read this book. Like I read the Gene Key and I knew that it was going to be a profound experience. I am prepared for that. I'm not just like whipping out the book and acting as if it's like a smut that I could just like read casually and like whatever. Like it's not. It's a deeply impactful experience. And so know that that's also the mindset that you're going to need to bring into this. And then again, yeah, Gene Key 43 came up later, so I did the same thing. It's like an intentional, again, it's like an active meditation almost is what it feels like. It feels like a spiritual upgrade every single time. Like my genetics are getting, upgraded to a higher expression. So that's why this is a difficult experience is to read this book. And the last thing I want to say about why it's intimidating and again, sort of setting these expectations is that because this book is a transmission or the closest that we can get to the Gene Keys transmission, that means that you're going to experience what I call the transmission effect. So, what is the transmission effect? The transmission effect is the experience of engaging with a transmission, feeling like as you're engaging with it, you're understanding everything and every answer is getting, or every question is getting answered and all the dots are falling into place and all the pieces are coming together and whatever. Everything's getting connected. And you're like having this like crazy spiritual experience reading this, engaging with the transmission. And then later you try to like explain that to someone else, or you try to like not regurgitate it, but just share it. And like nothing comes out, or how I like to call it, like mumbo jumbo comes out. It's like you can't, it's like you lost it. Because what did I get way into the weeds about earlier? It's a really high frequency thing. It's a really high frequency transmission, right? And so when you're in that state, your mind is like essentially achieving a higher frequency state, tapping into the atmic realm and getting bits and pieces of this transmission. And later, if you're not in that state, it can be difficult to express that stuff. And the other thing about that, what it shows us is that it's not just mental information, because even if you can't then, again, regurgitate's kind of a weird word. That's not what I want to say. But like, if you can't share it, or let's just use that word, regurgitate, if you can't say the thing, that doesn't mean it didn't impact you. That doesn't mean that you didn't have an energetic DNA experience, an energetic and genetic experience engaging with the transmission via the book. So that's why this book is challenging. So to bring it back together to some quick points and summarize this whole conversation, the Gene Keys book, the blue book, Embracing Your Higher Purpose. I know this is black and white in the video, but the blue book, Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose. Number one, not a book. It's the closest approximation to the direct transmission of the 64 Gene Keys teachings. So it's going to read like that. It's challenging to read. Number two, was brought through in English by a British poet. So a lot of poetic language, a lot of beautiful, almost like British mythology and poetry and things like that. So that can be a little difficult to penetrate into if you're not used to reading that kind of stuff. So that's another thing. Another thing really quickly about the transmission book is that it also reads a little scientific, because they're talking about the genetics and the codon rings and amino acid stuff. So as someone that went to school for marine science and studied science pretty intensely in class, I don't find that super difficult to read, but I can totally understand if you've never read that kind of language before, that it can be challenging. And then, yeah, if you haven't ever engaged with spiritual books, then that can also be difficult. So like reading something like The Power of Now, for example, can kind of prepare you for a book like this. So yeah, it's not a novel. It's not a textbook. It's a spiritual text. It's an energetic text, a little bit of science and poetry and prose and all of that in there. I pulled up what I was reading recently, which was Gene Key 43. And so here's a page. So he writes, the 43rd gene key is bonded in your DNA to the 34th gene key. Together, this chemical coupling creates a codon ring called the Ring of Destiny. Human destiny is caught between the polarity of these two gene keys, with the 34th representing the human urge to evolve and become more, and the 43rd representing the divine urge to involve and dive down into the world of form. The secret of this codon ring is the secret of timing, and through the ages it has whispered a great truth into the ears of those whose insight is developed enough to hear it. Life is a mystery in which chance and love are dancing together. The more you allow love, the more chance appears to work in your favor. When you love totally, unconditionally, even chance is shown to be an illusion, and the underlying cosmic geometry or cosmometry is revealed behind all things. It is only then that your timing becomes perfect, and that which appears to be random is understood as an aspect of the holographic universe unfolding its myth throughout your life. Destiny is governed by the combination of human strength and insight. Only at the highest acidic level do you transcend the force of destiny altogether. Okay, so that was the gift of Gene Key 43. That's a typical passage of that book. And as we saw, there was like a little bit of sciencey stuff going in there. There was some more advanced language in the Gene Keys canon, like hologenetically in their cosmometry, etc. So I'll just add one last bit of advice to this. This wasn't like the first thing I ever engage with the Gene Keys. I already had a huge background in human design, and then I was being taught Gene Keys from someone, so it was being interpreted. And so I was already familiar with a lot of this language. I was familiar with the gates, and so that made it easier to read the book, because I was like, I'm already placed in like, okay, this is Gene Key 43. It's in the Ajna Center. It's an individual circuitry. It reaches down to gate 23 in the throat center. It's the channel of structuring. It's the Freak to Genius channel. And so I was already like placed in this teaching. So I also recommend that. Number 3, let's set some expectations going into it. Number 1, read the intro. Number 2, don't feel like you need to read all of it. Just read your Gene Keys, however deep you want to go into your Gene Keys. Maybe just start with shadow and gift so that it's more applicable to my day-to-day and how I understand this stuff to be. And then number 3 or 4, or wherever number we're at right now in terms of expectations, know that you might experience something that's called the transmission effect, or what I call the transmission effect. No one calls it that but me, which is you're going to read it and maybe you get into that headspace, like set yourself up, by the way, for that good headspace. Like I was saying, you get into that headspace, you have this like beautiful spiritual experience. So many things are happening in your mind and body and soul, and you're understanding so many things. And then later you can't say any of it. And that's okay. You didn't lose the information. It still made an impact. So that's why this book is challenging. But don't sleep on it. It's incredibly important. It is what I read to connect with the Gene Keys, aka the 64 Gene Keys. So like I said, there's other things to read and courses to take, etc., to understand the entirety of the Gene Key synthesis. This is just the 64 Gene Keys, right? But that's what I read. But like I said, I know what it is. I know how to engage with it and how to prepare for it. So I'm not caught off guard by how intense it is. So that's why the Gene Keys book is intimidating. That's our teachable moment for today. I'll leave you with another helpful tip. So this is called the Blue Book in my mind. There's another book which I call the White Book. So the White Book, let me find it actually. I will link everything in the show notes below. The White Book is by Richard Rudd, and it's called The 64 Ways. And that is Richard's own contemplations on the 64 Gene Keys post having received and, birthed the Blue Book, right? So receiving the transmission and birthing the Blue Book. That Blue Book took him 7 years to write and is a really profound experience. Afterwards, he had thoughts about the 64 Gene Keys and shared them in audio notes. And then these are the transcriptions of those audio notes in book form in what I call the White Book. So that's called the 64 Ways. I think it's like Personal Contemplations on the Gene Keys. Yeah, that's the subtitle. Personal Contemplations on the Gene Keys. And yeah, it's Richard's own contemplations on the 64 Gene Keys. So in the way that on a podcast episode, like I did a podcast interview a few weeks ago, I'll include that linked below, on my friend Kristen's podcast. It's called Sacred Rebel. And we did a whole big conversation on Gene Key 38. That's just my personal contemplation on it at the time. So that's what's in this book, is Richard's own personal contemplations at that time of recording those audios and then transcribed into book form. So they're a little bit more practical, you could say. He's still a British poet though, so it's still going to have that kind of poetic language to it, but people find that book a little bit easier to engage with. And so maybe even start there. I went all the way in. I find that I have an easy connection to this transmission. So I love to just directly engage with the blue book. I honestly almost never go to the 64 ways. I do like to listen to the audios. So that's kind of nice. Like if I'm driving or something like that and I want to receive some wisdom on a gene key, I'll just listen to that. So I engage with it in that way. You can buy all the audios on their website if you want. I'll link that below too. But in terms of reading, I just go to the blue book, Embracing Your Higher Purpose. So that's it for our teachable moment of the day. I'll come up with a better segment name for that. I like alliterations anyway. But yeah, that's why the Gene Keys book is so intimidating. So if you are wanting to engage with it, know that there's a lot of nice ways you can set yourself up for success with that and reading that book. And yeah, and there's a whole other book on it if you want, from the man himself, if you want to hear his personal contemplations of it. If you are wanting to learn the 64 gene keys, by the way, I will be teaching all 64 of them next year. So in my previous podcast episode, I was hoping to start them this year. Not the case, but definitely starting next year. And you can get that entire library at an extremely discounted rate right now because it's not created yet. So we will go into all of the human design, the astrology, and then the 64 gene keys in depth, shadow gift city, all that stuff, victim theme, reactive, repressive, all that kind of stuff. And the way I teach it is more on the practical. Here's how it shows up. Here's how we can translate it to someone's experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you like the way I teach, you can totally learn the 64 gene keys from me starting next year. Okay. Let's get into some Q&As for this week's episode. So I just pulled some of the questions from the viral video because I think it's just fun. We can answer them in long form on the podcast, and then maybe you'll find these clipped on my TikTok too. So Velvet Petal asks, is there an easy way to digest all this information in order to learn how to read it? Because I want to learn, but I can't do an overwhelming amount of information. And that's a great question because you're tapping into the fact that it is an extreme amount of information. And unfortunately, there's nothing that can be done about the fact that it's an overwhelming amount of information. Overwhelming in the sense that it's a lot, right? So the video that Velvet Petal is commenting on, I'm talking about astrology, human design, and gene keys. It's a bananas amount of information. Like individually on their own, all three of those systems have so much depth to it. So that wasn't the question. The question was, is there an easy way to read it or an easy way to digest it? But I want to just point out that we can't get away from the fact that it's a lot of information. And so again, I think the key to success here is setting yourself up for success. So knowing that it's a lot, and the most important thing, not my Obama hand coming out, the most important thing, just kidding. That's a really, I'm not even going to try to do an Obama impersonation. That was really embarrassing. Anyway, but the most important thing is like not having the expectation that you can learn it all or that you can learn it all quickly. So you definitely can't learn it all quickly. By quickly, I mean within 3 months, be able to know everything there is to know about astrology, human design, and gene keys. And then second of all, there's no way that you can know everything there is to know about any of the systems, let alone all three. That might sound depressing. Like, what do you mean? I can never know it all. It's just a fact of the matter because there is an unlimited amount of interpretation of all three of the systems. And that used to really frustrate me when I was not into this world and I wanted to know, like, well, what's the objective truth about my astrological sign? Because I just knew about my sign, for example, like my sun sign, Capricorn. And I would hear, oh, this astrologer is this interpretation or this astrologer is that interpretation. It's like, but who knows the truth? Like, I'd be like, I would get upset about it. I'd be like, who knows the actual truth? And now understanding that these are transmissions, it's like what we interpret from the transmission is just how I can tap into it and then transmit it to someone else through my energetic vessel. This is a random tangent, but it's important to know. When a reader is tapping into a transmission, like astrology, like human design, like gene keys, they're using their mental, emotional, and physical body, or their higher bodies, you could say, to tap into that field of living wisdom, download some of that information when it comes to frequency, and then it's going to run through their aura, and then it's going to come out the other side. And not only does it have to run through your aura, it also is going to run through the limits of your language, right? So what do I mean by that? We're just going to say it in the simplest way. I have a defined throat in human design, and all of my design ends in gate 20 in the now. So for me, it's really important to just yap in the now. When I do a reading, like I just need to, whatever's going to come through that reading that day is what's going to come through. And that's pretty typical for anyone that's channeling this information and transmitting the information. But particularly for me, it's just like 5720 intuition in the now brainwave. It's just going to download in the moment. I'm sorry. I prep for my readings, and I know that the most valuable thing I can offer is just like what's coming through in the moment. So like the mechanics of my circuitry, for example, in human design is going to really impact how things come through. Number two, my vocation is 44.3. So 44, we'll just say really quickly, is pattern recognition. And then line 3 is strategy, and it's about how to make information useful. So what I'm really good at doing, and what you'll find me doing in my courses and in my readings and all that, is I'm recognizing patterns and then I'm transmitting them to you in a useful way. Like, let's make it practical. Here's how it shows up in your day-to-day. The words I love to use are like your day-to-day, nitty-gritty, everyday experience. Just like, how does it actually show up? And that's different than someone who is transmitting things in a completely different way with a line 6 and they're a projector and whatever. Like, I have a totally different mechanical circuitry and gene keys vocation. And so it's just going to come out in my own way. And then it's also going to come out in English with someone who learned Spanish as their first language and studied science, like whatever. Like, it's going to come out through my energy and also through my 3D reality and my lived experiences. And that's what my quote unquote interpretation is. It's not that it's just like, well, this is my interpretation. Like, no, it's just, this is how I receive and then channel and then later transmit this information. That is what you could call your interpretation. So okay, so going back to that, it's an overwhelming amount of information and there's no one single truth. That's just the way that it is. There's just no single objective way to view really any of this. And unfortunately, we can't get away from the fact that there is an absolutely astronomical amount of information for all these 3 systems. So that's like part 1 of that question, which wasn't the question, but just I wanted to point that out. And so how we can view it instead is like, this is so cool. I have all this information to learn. Like, I love it. And I am free to follow my intuition and follow the people I want to learn from and the things I want to learn about first. I didn't want to learn astrology first. I hated astrology. I thought people that were into astrology were annoying and dumb. And then I found human design and I was like, wait, this is so sick. And that lit me up in terms of like sacrally. So I followed my intuition, aka in this case, my response and my strategy. And that led me to Gene Keys. And I was like, wait, this is like even sicker. Like, I really want to know this. And then that actually got me more excited to learn astrology. And so I got to find my own path and follow my own excitement and joy and interest when it came to learning this stuff. And I didn't approach it from, I have to know everything now, or I'm lost, or it's not worth it. I got to just like follow that joy. And of course, there are times that I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to know all of this. I wish I could know it all now, but like, whatever. I don't know it all now and I can't know it all now, and that's okay. I always said I'll have like a year or a time when I go into a really deep astrology deep dive. And 2024, last year, I spent all year deeply, deeply studying astrology, and it was wonderful. I took a break this year, but I will keep coming back to it, and I need to continue my studies of the gene keys in human design too. Okay. Part 2, the actual question. Is there an easy way to digest all this information in order to learn how to read it? Let's talk about it. What does easy mean? Again, does easy mean quick or fast? And what does that mean? So let's try to understand this really quickly. So is there an easy way? Yes. The easiest way is to find the way that you resonate most with. So to find your teacher, to find the format. So format meaning, do you want to read a book? I know a lot of people that just, when they wanted to dive into human design, they just bought all the human design books from Ra Ruhu, who's a messenger, but also from Chetan Parkin or from Karen Curry Parker, to incredibly prolific human design writers, and just like read all the books. And that's how they learn, through books. I'm a course kind of gal. I love a module with slides. So I love audio and visual. So do you like courses? Do you like to have someone teach it to you in that way? Do you just want to binge a bunch of podcasts and just kind of dip your feet in that way. Again, there's not a ton of podcasts on Gene Keys, but lots and lots on astrology, obviously, and then a pretty good amount on human design too, for sure. And then do you want to find another medium that you like? The mediums basically are reading. So reading a book, reading blogs. I got started with a bunch of blogs on human design for sure. Shout out Interior Creature. I'll link her below. Reading books, reading blogs, or taking a course. So watching slides while listening to someone teaching you. So that's like audio visual, or you could just do audio through podcasts, etc. So those are the formats. And then who's the messenger? So who's the teacher? Do you want to go straight to source? I have lots of thoughts on that. We can do let's do a whole podcast episode on like source or not source. I think that would be a really good topic. So let's do that maybe next week. I'm saying that now, but I'm an MG, so we'll see what I do. But let's do source or not source at some point. But yeah, do you want to go learn directly from Richard, learn directly from Ra, or do you want to learn from someone who speaks your language? So they might not speak your language, and I don't mean like English, I mean like the way you think. So in terms of like an easy way to receive it, if it's the right format and the right messenger, that's going to be the easiest way to digest the information. So obviously I teach Gene Keys inside the Master Key, everything about the Golden Path and the foundations of all the systems, astrology, human design, all that stuff. My close friend Katie Irvin does a fantastic job of teaching human design at an incredibly in-depth level while still making it easy to understand. So you can check out HT School in the link below. My original teacher of all this stuff is Eden Carpenter. I will link her work below as well. She teaches us things in a very different way than Katie or I. And yeah, and has her own 6-line vision for things. And I'll link my astrology teacher below as well, Aisha Durrani. So those are my teachers of this stuff. So, find the teachers that work for you. I love to engage with source, and then I love to engage with the teachers that I really resonate with, that can speak my language. As you can kind of guess, source is like older white men, and then the teachers that I love are young women. So there's a way in which we want to have this information interpreted to us from someone that speaks our language. So if you're not a young woman, you might want to find the kind of person that you want to learn from, who is most similar to you or speaks to you. That's going to be the easiest way to digest the information. So number one, follow your excitement, intuition, aka strategy and authority. And then number two, allow that to lead you to the right formats and the right messengers, while knowing that it might not happen quickly. But again, quick is like a relative thing. So for me, for example, I'm a line 2 in human design. So for the right things, the things that are for me, I will learn them incredibly quickly and easily. And that is what it felt like with human design and Gene Keys. It was just like, oh, duh, like remembering of the language, like, yep, this makes perfect sense to me, etc. It's not going to be everyone's experience, but that doesn't mean that you still can't learn quickly. A lot of people, especially when they get really excited about it, like they take in a ton of information and then it just takes some time to kind of settle. What I'm trying to say is you might learn a lot of mental information very fast, but again, what's the expectation? It's still a lifelong journey. So you're never going to just like know all of it perfectly, even mentally, like intellectually, but certainly not all the way embodied necessarily of all three, like within a year. That's just not a thing. It's a lifelong experiment. For human design, you could say it's a lifelong contemplation with the Gene Keys. You can experiment and contemplate astrology. And so, I wish I could tell you, Velvet Petal, that, yeah, man, just read this book and it's Gene Keys Astrology Human Design, and it just like it's so easy and tells you all this stuff. But that's just not how these systems work. I do my best inside of the Master Key to teach this stuff in an incredibly easy to digest way. And that's the feedback I get from students, and the teachers that I recommend also teach things in a way that's easy to digest. But that doesn't mean that it's not like a bananas amount of information, and that it's going to take time, and that it's going to require your engagement with it. It's not something that you can just kind of like passively, without any sort of intention or effort, just master in like a very short amount of time, let's say a couple months or a year. It's something that requires, it's not that it's incredibly difficult effort, but it requires a certain amount of wanting to engage with the material and willingness to let it settle and willingness to return to it again and again. Like I've read that chapter of Gene Key 43 that we read together earlier like a billion times. And so I go back to it. And every time you go back to it, you learn something new. You see a thing you didn't see before. That's also why it's called living wisdom, because it's kind of like alive and shifting and not static in a way. But it's the same with reading, a novel. You go back and you're like, oh, I totally missed this foreshadowing or this, or what. Like you go back and re-engage with things. So there's no just like, yeah, just do this 1 hour masterclass and you can read everything, because that's Velvet Petal's question. Is there an easy way to digest all this information in order to learn how to read it? And it's like, if you want to learn to read charts in any of the disciplines, it's going to require some time. If you want to learn how to read all three of those charts, oh, it's going to take you more time than that. Not in a bad way. Not like, oh my God, this is horrible, it's going to take all this time, but just let it take time. It's okay. It's okay. And you can learn enough information to read a chart rather quickly to just be able to glean the main insights from that. And then just the more that you study it and the more that you engage with it, especially just start with your own chart. For anyone listening, always start with reading your own chart. The more you learn, the deeper you'll be able to go into the meaning of the chart and the wisdom it has there for you. So yeah, there's an easy way. The easy way is to follow your strategy and authority to the right format and the right messenger, and follow what excites you to learn about that thing. So even within the Gene Keys, I mainly just stay within the golden path, and I don't necessarily go to like the dream arc or other things like that. With human design, I got really into like the dream rave at a certain point. I got really into PHS and rave psychology at a certain point. It's like I follow the system I want to learn, let's say Gene Keys, and then I follow the teaching within that I want to learn that is exciting to me. That's the easy way to learn it, while knowing that it takes time, it takes patience, and it'll unfold in a way that is a mystery to all. Like when an insight will hit you is not really up to your control. You can just create the conditions for insight. And the conditions are contemplation, essentially, according to the Gene Keys. But contemplation requires patience. So I know you want to read it. Get excited about one system, go into that, follow what's exciting to you. Get readings from people. That's super helpful. If you want to learn to read charts, get readings on your charts. And then my recommendation in terms of the way I went about it, I wanted to learn to read these charts. So I bought courses of people that were teaching me how to read charts. And then I created a course on how to read Gene Keys charts, which is the master key. So if you want to learn to read charts from me, from the Gene Keys perspective, rooted in human design and astrology and beyond, that's what the master key is for. But yeah, unfortunately, it is an overwhelming amount of information. Fortunately, it's an overwhelming amount of information. Like, it's so cool. There's so much to learn, and there's no rush. There's no deadline. There's no pressure. Nothing like that. But I think it's important, as we talked about with why the Gene Keys book is intimidating, a lot of it is expectation setting. I think it's important to know, with it being an overwhelming amount of information, that that's the expectation, that it's a lot of information. And so just take it one bite at a time and follow what you're excited by. Okay, I think that horse is thoroughly beaten to the ground, and that concludes our Q&A section. We'll just do one at a time. I had another one pulled up for today, but honestly, I just talk so much, so we're just gonna low and slow do one of these questions at a time. And yeah, let's end with my little MG mischief, what I'm up to. So really quick intro to this segment. I just find that as a manifesting generator, I am constantly in phases. Like, that's just a thing for my life. I even had, for my podcast episodes, ideas from at the very beginning of when I launched this podcast, which at this point is 2 years ago, which is cool. Just over 2 years ago, I had a whole podcast episode called "It's Not Just a Phase," or like "It Is a something about like decriminalizing the idea of things being phases." Because like, I am a manifesting generator who, what that means simply is like multi-passionate, and I'm jumping from one thing to another. And I'm also a line 3 vocation. So I'm going to go in phases, experiment with this, experiment with that. And so I'm in phases all the time. And I found that I really wanted to talk about these things, but the struggle for me was like, as an open G center, a flexible identity, I was like, trying to almost like make them my identity forever. Like, let me do this thing forever. And like, oh, it's going to be so overwhelming to now have to do this thing forever in my business or whatever, or topics or etc. And it's like, how about we just accept that they're just like a little phase, and that's okay. So yeah, so my current phase obsession is e-readers and Kindles. So I've had this Kindle for a while and I've had this case for a bit, but I'm in so many Reddits about it and just talking about it all the time with people, like why they're so awesome. So let me just like shyly, I don't know why I feel so shy, but like just talk about why I think Kindles are so cool and maybe give some kind of cancelable takes around books. Sorry for book lovers, but yeah. Okay. So number one, we're just going to get into it. If you don't have a Kindle case that has a tripod like this, so you can put your book down on a table and have it be up while you read or something, what are you even doing? And then second of all, not as important, but still pretty important, having a hand strap so you can also hold your book if you need to hold it. What are we even doing? There's so many cute Kindle cases. I have a Kindle. There's so many cute Kindle cases I want to buy and I can't because they don't have a tripod and hand straps, but I need both. So I'm just stuck with this leather book. Anyway, still obsessed with it. I think it looks so cute. This black leather vibe. I don't know. It fulfills the urge of having a secret mystical journal or something that I always wanted as a kid. But to get into like the real thing, this is my cancelable take. I love reading, hate books. Hate books. What do I mean by that? Love the experience of reading a book, but I don't like the experience, which is like, I know that so many people are like, I love books. I love like the smell of the pages and like turning the physical page. I fucking hate that experience. I don't care about the smell. It's not that I hate the smell. I just don't care about it. And I don't particularly feel like I enter into a library and I'm like, oh, the smell. I don't like really like that. But I find that physical books, and look, I'm a huge bookworm and I read all my life and it very much perturbs me how illiterate children are these days and how illiterate in general the American public is. But I never really liked the experience of reading a book because if I read the book, if I want to read the book, it's heavy. And at the very beginning and at the very end, it's really hard because you have like one page in 1,000 pages. So then on one side, there's only one page and it's all misbalanced. And then like I would love to read with a drink, but then what if my drink spills on the book? It's so annoying. It gets ruined. And then I got to take the dust jacket off because I'm not fucking taking that anywhere. That's so annoying. And then the dust jacket gets ruined and the book gets ruined. It's not this perfect thing and it just pisses me off. I did have a phase in my life where I would carry around like smaller paperbacks and I had annotated in books for like a few years. Like I'd write just fucking crazy notes in the books and stuff like that. And that was enjoyable. But you can do that in a Kindle. You can do that in an e-reader. You can highlight a thing and write your note in there. So anyway, hate books for that reason. And also what's really annoying is when you have a library, I hate when books are not the same size and thickness, but then also uniformity also looks bad. So it's like, there's no satisfying, like, I've just had so many experiences of like, I want to put these books together, but like this one's fucking huge. It's like 2 times the size and the width and like half the thickness. It's like really skinny, but really tall and wide. And then I have this like fat little shorty chode book that I'm trying to like put together in it. And then it's ruined. I can't. I hate it. And I know this is such a cancelable opinion because there's so many people that are like, oh my God, I love physical books and I want to build my home library, whatever. Bitch, I have my home library here. This is my home library in this one little thing and on my iPad and on my phone and on my computer. It's like, wherever I go. So recently, let's talk about His Dark Materials really quick. Let's fucking talk about His Dark Materials really fucking quick. Okay. We need to do a whole podcast episode on His Dark Materials because in His Dark Materials, the I Ching is mentioned in the Rose Field, which is the latest book of the second trilogy. Fucking neutrinos are mentioned, which if you know what that is the principal scientific, like, foundational principle of the human design system, and Ra Uru predicted neutrinos before they were even measured by science, and then they were measured 11 years later. Neutrinos are in this fucking book. Like, so His Dark Materials talks about consciousness, and it's a fantastic set of books. Read the first 3, His Dark Materials. It's The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, The Amber Spyglass. Best book series of all time for sure. And then the second trilogy, it's called The Book of Dust. Dust is consciousness. And the first book is great. The second 2, not so great. So the Rosefield, I waited 6 years for it to come out because the last book, The Secret Commonwealth, came out 6 years ago in 2019. And the fucking Rosefield took me 6 years to get this book. It actually coincided perfectly because I was super sick all week last week. And so the day that the Rosefield came out, I reread The Secret Commonwealth in a day and a half. So like 600 pages in like a day and a half. And then immediately started on the Rosefield, another day and a half done. And anyway, not as good, but what's cool about e-readers that you can't get with other books. Back to e-readers is what I'm obsessed with. I'm obsessed with reading and e-readers, and something else I'm going to mention at the end is you can look up words while you're reading them. So that's also another thing I would suggest if you're reading the Gene Keys book. Read it on a fucking Kindle, or just download the Kindle Cloud Reader app. If you don't want to buy a whole e-reader, just download the app for free and then get the ebook. It's going to weigh less, cost less. Like, books cost less on e-readers. Like, it's so much better. Anyway, and then, for example, let's read this again. So let's find something challenging to read here. What's a difficult word? I'm just going to pick a random word. They keep mentioning the word epiphany, and also Epiphany is the city of Gene Key 43. So if I don't know what epiphany means, and I'm showing this in the video, I just highlight it. I just hold my finger down, and then epiphany pops up, the dictionary definition, and then we get right here a couple different things. So we have the first noun, the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles as represented by the Magi. Didn't know that. That's cool. Another definition, a manifestation of a divine or supernatural being. Another definition, a moment of sudden revelation or insight. And then it keeps going. So I have a dictionary right here. I can choose which dictionary I want. I'm right now using the New Oxford American Dictionary. And if I scroll to the right, it searches Wikipedia for me. So I get the Wikipedia page of Epiphany in e-reader ink, and without having to whip up my phone and get distracted by like whatever. So it pulls up the Wikipedia page for me. And then if I scroll to the right again, it allows me to translate. So if for example, Spanish is my first language, sometimes there's just words in English that you can't get to Spanish, or words in Spanish that you can't get to English. And like, I understand it, whatever. Long story short, it's just helpful to translate those things. And then, for example, in the Rose Field, there was a lot of French and German in the book without translations, which I can read them basically, but it was nice to just be able to confirm everything through being able to translate directly in the ear. That's crazy. Like, that's so helpful. So that's fucking fantastic. And just made me again realize why I'm so obsessed with e-readers. Is like, I was reading The Rose Field, and it wasn't an epic story that gripped me in the way that his Dark Materials did, but there were so many beautiful descriptions and there were so many cool words, because this is written by a fucking Oxford academic, and he's a lot older and has been writing the series of his Dark Materials all the way up to The Rose Field. So 6 major books and then some shorter books over 30 years. He's been writing in this universe for over 30 years. It's a very developed universe. He uses very cool language, and it's just helpful to be able to bring it up. So anyway, if you've ever hated on e-readers, if you're like a physical book girly or whatever, I don't know, man, this shit slaps. Like, last thing about the Rose Field and why I love e-readers, and yeah, this is like, I hope you like these little MG Mischief sections. This is like my one little place to just talk about personal stuff. I was reading in the Reddit, so I wanted to discuss, I love Reddit because you can discuss your favorite books with people. It's so cool. And people were like, I can't get the Rose Field. I went to Target and I went to here and I went to there. And I'm like, I have never had that issue because I just go on Kindle and I just buy it. And it costs half the amount, and I just get it instantly, and it just downloads into I was sick as hell, so I wasn't definitely not going to leave my house, and I just get this instant thing added to my e-reader, to my library, that I can now have forever, which is cool. And if you have a Kindle, there's ways to back up your books. There's ways to go around Amazon, by the way, to get e-readers. You don't just have to buy them from Amazon if you want to do that. And so I've done that a little bit here and there. You can get books in other ways. You can get e-publication books in other ways. But man, like, this thing lasts forever. It weighs the same amount. I can increase the font. I can increase the brightness. In the phone, you can change it to be like sepia background or black background, like dark mode, which is so fun. My friend's stepdaughter has dyslexia. There's a dyslexia font, so you can change it to a dyslexia font to be able to read more easily, which is crazy. You can look up anything you want on Wikipedia. You can translate it. You can choose the dictionaries you want to look things up in. You can annotate. You can bookmark. And this is my entire book collection. I can take this wherever I want. I don't see the appeal of physical books. And again, this is coming from a person who obsessively reads and loves books, or rather loves reading, but doesn't like books. So that's my little MG Mischief. And I will end with my reading obsession next project that is very like timely to the moment. So I have been feeling, as we have encountered a pretty shocking time in our history, that I wish I had paid more attention in history classes when I was younger. And you need to learn history, right? And so that coupled with this TikTok trend I've been seeing around of coming up with your personal learning curriculum, I have decided that I need to put myself in a American and world history course. So I think it's minimum going to need to be like a year. And I'm going to try to break it up in like a couple semesters. And I need to get placed in time and context. I have some of this time and placement in time, and I have some of this context, and that's helpful, but certainly not enough. And I just feel a really strong urge to do that. So if you have any world history or American history book recommendations, I would love to hear them. I'm going to use the help of online, like I think like Harvard and other universities offer free courses online, or you can see their syllabi. So I'm going to look up some well-respected university syllabi to see what books are recommended and get some inspiration for how to like put these semesters together. I'm going to Google and see what people are saying, go to forums. I might ask Geppetto, that is ChatGPT if you're unfamiliar, and see what she has to say. But yeah, it feels very important and very urgent to do that. I have found there's a woman on TikTok, I'll link her below. I was listening to her stuff yesterday. I've been following her for a little bit, but she has a series around building your personal library in response to this historical time and what are the books that you would want for something like that. But it's a lot of books and I need to do like maybe 12 a year. I'm not going to read more than one intense history book a month, I don't think. Maybe I'll devour them. I don't know. But yeah, I'll link her too as well. She has some good recommendations, especially around like activism and mutual aid. And yeah, but I feel like I need more placement in time and I need more context and more education around this kind of stuff. So I'm super excited about that. And guess what? I don't have to carry around these fucking heavy ass books because I have a Kindle. I am like Kindle supremacy. And I don't think I'll ever prefer a physical book over a Kindle except when it has like pictures or something in it, because the Kindle's obviously in black and white or whatever. I think there are some color readers, but I don't want that. But yeah, I'm excited to add to my Kindle library. So that's my current MG Mischief phase, just obsessing about e-readers, obsessing about his dark materials, wanting both more cool fantasy books to read while also wanting a good structured curriculum of world history and American history and politics and gender stuff. Like there's a lot. Like I don't know, like 12 books is not going to be enough, so I'm going to need to keep going for a while. But yeah, that I do think my next book that I'm going to read is Loud by Drew Afwalo. I just love everything she has to say, so I'm going to read her book next. And yeah, that's my current obsession. If you are a book person, you can't change my mind, sorry, but you're welcome to share below why you're a book person. Yeah, that is everything for today. Thank you so much for listening. It's so good to be back and recording podcast episodes. I would just love any more comments or questions. Like this TikTok viral video has been such a freaking treasure trove and so much fun for me. So please ask questions and I will sit and answer them long form on the podcast. I will sit and answer them short form on TikTok videos and all that kind of stuff. But I want to hear all your thoughts, every question you have, everything you have to say. Yeah. And I'm so curious if those little tips on how to make this bad boy more approachable were helpful to you. And yeah, thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next one.